Alrighty, hi everybody, I am Blaze. So this video is going to be an update to one I did previously, being the Necro class guide review, level 150 in the classic era. So this is going to be 1 to 60 in the Kunark era. Going to be a bit redundant like the last one. I want to make sure I mention all the big parts, all the big key aspects that I find that are important about the class. And again, one thing I'd like to mention as well, that this video is more intended to be a what can the Necromancer class do. If you want to see how to play the class, I have a whole entire series on this class rating, grouping, soloing, on this little playlist here, Necro EverQuest Mangler. Same thing with my Bard class. If you want to see how these classes actually function in reality, definitely go check these out. So let's get into it, shall we? I'm going to annotate the video, so in the description, I'm going to put links with all the little aspects. So when I talk about grouping, rating, soloing, I'm going to have a link, or I'm going to have a timestamp for when I talk about those specific aspects of the class. So you can kind of skip forward if you want to see one particular part of it. Anyways, let's get into it. So right now, 120. So there are two key aspects to the Necromancer class that I think every Necromancer needs to keep in mind. One being mana efficiency, and two being speed of damage output. And what I mean by this is, as a Necromancer, one of the core aspects you need to pay attention to is you want to be as mana efficient as possible with all the damage that you put out. And that's partly of what spell does the most damage for the least amount of mana, and also what spell does that damage over an efficient time period. Because oftentimes many of the Necro dots last for a minute and a half in length, and most groups are killing mobs within 15 to 20 seconds, which using a full-length dot like that on a very quick kill is highly inefficient. So that's another thing you really have to keep in mind. Mana efficiency based upon the damage output versus how much mana it costs, and as well as the speed at which it needs to be done. And that's kind of one of the flaws of the Necromancer class, is they're not super good at putting out damage quick, but they're incredible about putting out damage long term. They are the best in the game. So let's talk about group roles. This will be at 3 minutes. So group roles. What are the functions that Necromancers perform in groups? Their primary function is DPS. They can do heals, HP, and mana twitches. They can do Dead Man Floating buff. They can do dispels. Do disease cures. They can do snares and minor crowd control. With root and okay. So Necromancers are primarily a DPS class. They're the best dot class in the game. They have the most mana efficient dots you can possibly put out. Some of the other functions they provide in groups, they have something called Shadow Bond, which is a heal that takes your own health and gives it to another person. I think it's 500 hit points. It totals up to a 500 hit point heal over 24 seconds. Necromancers can also do a twitch, which is they can give out mana. I think this is 400 mana to give like 125 to another person in the group. Not very efficient, but still. It's there, so they can do that. But come later expansions, I think the Twitch line gets neglected, so that ability goes away. But I'm talking about Kunark. Yeah, twitching is still there. And it can be useful in certain circumstances, but in other circumstances, it's more inefficient to twitch than it is just to put out extra DPS. So it just depends on the circumstances. Necromancers, Dead Man Floating, of course, which is a buff which has water breathing, sea invisibility, poison resistance, and levitation combined. So it's really useful for raids in that regard. The next thing, Necromancers do have a double dispel. They can debuff against their own dots. I think it's called Scent of Terrace that they get. Yeah, Scent of Terrace. This is a debuff. Fire, poison, and disease resistance that goes down. Sort of like a Tash or a Mallow. The other thing they can do, they can snare, of course. They have their little snare line being these ones. And the Necromancer Epic actually has a snare. I wanted to do this video with the Necromancer Epic, but it's been 3 weeks of trying to kill the golems to get the slime blood. That's the last piece I absolutely need, and no luck so far, so I'm just going to do it now. Typically with the snares, these are highly mana inefficient, so you want to use a lower level one, to be honest. Yeah, use a lower level one. My favorite's Engulfing Darkness. It doesn't cost too much mana, but it's a good enough snare for what I need to accomplish. The next thing I will mention, as well as minor crowd control abilities. This is actually quite useful. So Necromancers have this ability called Screaming Terror. They get it at level 22. And it can mez up to level 55, which is incredibly useful. Now, I mean, come future expansions, this ability is going to be useless, but as it stands right now, it can really help out with spot mezzes. It can help you out with a recharm. If it's just one extra mob, this can be incredibly useful. The only problem is the recast delay is pretty bad. So you can really only hold down one mob at a time. Or you can just throw out one of your long duration roots. This is a 3-minute long root. That's not that bad. It's 3 minutes holding down a mob. As long as it's not a caster, is quite effective. So let's get into the next aspect, which is going to be their raid rolls. 7 minutes into the video. My pen's being a little quirky. These Louise pens did not want to work. Okay, so raid rolls. These. So raid rolls, what are the things what do they do? They are DPS. I mentioned dot rotations. EMF, of course. Their HP plus mana heals. Corpse summons. And res. And of course, you know, the minor crowd control. So, Necromancers on raids, they actually perform a bit better than in groups, because often when you're talking about these raid mobs, they have more hit points. So these fights are often extended to the point where Necromancers can get full efficiency on their big damage dealing dots. So Necromancers, their primary dot rotations, or their primary means to do damage, are their magic line of dots, disease line, poison, fire, and charm. And a thing to also keep in mind are belly caster mobs that can kind of throw you off. Casters and magic resistant. So the primary dot lines: magic, disease, fire, poison, and charm, in terms of doing DPS as a Necromancer on many of these raids. But there was one thing. I often see them definitely at the top of the parse on many of these different raid targets. Now, some of the problems when it comes to raids, though, is that some mobs are belly casters, so you have to get right up on them, which is something I never really knew about until I played this class. And some mobs are extremely resistant. And most mobs that a lot of the minis and hate, you can't land some of these dot lines. Like most mobs in hate, disease won't land. Poison's a hit or miss. Fire almost lands on everything. So fire is good too, but it's one of the worst dot lines. Splurt lands, the magic line lands on a lot of stuff too. But charm, in my opinion, is really the best. That is just static DPS that'll work on any mob, even if it's resistant to magic. As long as you have a charm pet beaten down, that's going to be helping you out. Now I remember what I wanted to mention about necromancers. It's a bit out of place, but when it comes to their HP and mana heals, a big thing I want to mention is that I kind of look at them as if they're a battery. Where bards statically boost the HP and mana regen of the group, necromancers are sort of a battery that holds hit points and holds mana, and they can transfer it out to other people in the group. They're really one of the only classes that can actually do that, that can transfer mana and hit points in that manner. And what's nice about them is they're often very self-sufficient to the point where I can heal entirely for free with my skull cap. I can put out Shadow Bond, and I can heal entirely free with this Morturnum cast. The only problem is it's 10 seconds. And with the incredible amount of mana regen that I get from the Lich line, I can Twitch quite easily. It's not that big of a deal for me. And with the free dots and with the Charm Pet, I'm not really hurting all that much for mana. It's really easy for me as a Necromancer to always be full mana, to be honest. Health has always been more of the thing. Some other things that Necromancers can do, they can do corpse summons, of course. You know, you get these Tidy Jade and Laid Coffins. You can get these from Neriak, but you can actually also get them from East Freeport. It's right next to, there are these merchants. Okay, so this is the entrance to West Freeport. It's near these merchants that are right here. I think it's Patria and Anicius. It's one of these guys right here that sells the Tiny Jade and Laid Coffins. They also sell, I think, pearls. They sell some other reagents for necromancers, so they're quite useful in that regard. I go see this area. You don't have to go to Neriak to go get it. I think it's about 60 something plat, somewhere around there on my bard, so it's not that bad. So definitely that was worth mentioning. The next thing I'd like to get into. Necromancers can res. So the way the Necromancers res is a little bit different. They can do a 93% res with something called an Essence Emerald. These are just regular emeralds. And the way it works is you cast a spell called Sacrifice onto a player. It's got to be in your group. Consumes one of these emeralds, and it gives you something called an Essence Emerald. Now what Sacrifice does is it permanently, it kills the person that's in your group, and it makes it so that corpse cannot be rezzed. So once that person eats that death, that experience is gone. But it puts that experience into this Essence Emerald that can be used as a 93% res. And it's incredibly useful in that I think they sell for about 400 plat, but it's incredibly useful in that if you have a full grade wipe and you're the last one left, you can res a cleric so that they can get everybody else up. Or if you're in a really hard zone, if you're in a really difficult zone, Infusion is the res spell. Yeah, if you're in a really, no, not Infusion, Conversions is the res. Yeah, this is it. If you're in a really difficult zone like Howling Stones, where often time clerics aren't keyed to get in, the only people that could res you aren't, and oftentimes no one goes to those zones, or they're very vacant. The ability to res yourself or to res other people in your group is tremendously useful. Tremendously useful in those circumstances. It saved my own bacon and stuff. The only problem is that you get that Essence Emerald costs a bit of money. It's 400 a pop. 400 plat a pop. Or it's a permanent death. It's a permanent EXP loss by that person that's with you. And then, again, one of the last things about Necromancers being crowd control. They can function as in raids. Now, let's talk about souling. So this is going to be 15 minutes. into the video. Control soloing. So they can do fear kiting, root rotting, what dots to use. They can do normal charming, reverse charming, pet tanking, shadow bond. There might be more soloing techniques, but these are the ones that I'm familiar with. So various different soloing techniques that necromancers can do. They can do fear kiting. So this is actually quite useful against caster mobs. And basically what it means is you snare a mob and you cast a fear on it, throw a couple dots on it, maybe send your pet after it, and just beat it down to death. The only issue with it is you need some room. You really need some space to be able to do this. It's one of your really only soloing strategies as a lower level necromancer, but as you get higher, I don't necessarily like it because dungeons can get kind of cramped. And having to constantly run around is somewhat of a pain. With root rotting is actually better. Root rotting is quite convenient. So with paralyzing earth, as long as a mob isn't ridiculously magic resistant, it's a 3-minute long root, and splurt being your longest dot being 1 minute 36 seconds, you can pretty much cast 2 splurts by the time that paralyzing earth wears off. And with root rotting, all it is you just cast a bunch of dots onto a mob and then just let it sit in the root until it dies. There is one thing to know though, is direct damage, DD, direct damage, will break charms. So there's some dots that necromancers have that have a direct damage component that will break charms. So there's specific dots you do want to use if you don't want to have a chance of breaking a root. These dots are often do less damage and are slower, so it kind of depends the trade-off. It's like, if you're okay with taking a couple hits to start off a fight, it's probably better to use the faster and more mana efficient and harder hitting dots. But if you don't want to have a chance of a root to break, then you're going to want to use these dots that aren't as efficient, but don't break the roots. I'll mention those as I get further down. Yeah, I'll mention those as I get farther down in the video. I have a whole section related to the dots. So the next thing I'll mention is normal charming. So this is, say, if you're in a group. Charm DPS is just insane. I'm going to mention it more again farther down. Charming a undead mob is insane DPS, and oftentimes these undead mobs are 2 to 3 times more DPS than your own summon pet. They're just so much more useful. The only risk are charm breaks. So oftentimes, if I can, I almost never use my pet. My pet is actually a big inconvenience. It's such a pain to have to constantly micromanage this guy, even when I'm root rotting. It's sort of a safety net of if my first feign death fails, it can tank it for a bit while I get another chance. But it's really just kind of like a sacrifice, to be honest. It's more of just a way of saving my own butt. The pet really honestly just gets in the way. It's really just inconvenient. And the life tap proc it has often breaks the roots. So I don't even really like to use them when I'm root rotting, to be honest. But charm pets are absolutely worth it. I actually prefer charm pets over dots, and I'll explain why in a bit. There's reverse charming. So this is like how bards do AoE swarm kiting. And this is where you get a whole pack of mobs, you charm one pet, and you have that whole pack beat down in your pet until it gets low on health, and then you finish it yourself. That's that technique. It can be kind of risky, though. You have to be careful. I think you need to root that whole pack before you break your own charm, just so that you don't get smacked when they all come running at you. And then there's, of course, pet tanking. You can use these summon pets, or you can do a charm pet and just use like your Morturnum cap to heal yourself while you're life tapping. Roguelike slaves. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So let's get into the next part, being miscellaneous things. And the time so far is 20 minutes. So in terms of miscellaneous things about necromancers, let's talk about clickies. So we're going to talk about the epic, circlet of shadows, fungi staff, J-boots, demi-lich skullcap, the sacred shield of dread, and the Necro third book. Thurgmatist book. Might be some other clickies, but these are the big ones. So, the clickies. The Necromancer Epic, from my understanding, is not incredibly useful. It's great in terms of stats wise, but yeah, this guy has one. I'm just one piece away, and I've just had such bad luck with a slime blood drop. But the Necromancer Epic, it has it's a 9-second cast. It's a 9-second cast, which has a snare. It's a snare, actually. So it's a snare with, I think, a 75 damage dot attached with it. It's not all that useful, to be honest, because 9 seconds is kind of ridiculous to cast a snare. I mean, it's mana free, and the most efficient dots are mana free ones, but also you have to kind of consider the amount of time it takes just to cast in the first place, which is highly inconvenient. So yeah, the Necromancer Epic is a bit nothing to write home about. What people consider to be the real Necromancer Epic is the Demi-Lich Skullcap. This thing, it doesn't show the amount of damage, but it's a free life tap. The only problem with it is it takes 10 seconds to cast, but it's a free life tap dot that lands on most mobs, even very highly resistant mobs. So it's a 122 at level 60. It's 122 points of damage and a life tap for 54 seconds. I think it regens about 1,000 hit points or something to that effect. So it's incredibly helpful. It's incredibly helpful. And with this cap, hit points are pretty much never a concern anymore for you as a Necromancer, losing hit points. As well as it allows you to pretty much heal for free with Shadow Bond. Shadow Bond doesn't tap as much hit points as Morturnum regenerates. So often you can just stand up and heal any group members for free. You can send out free heals all day long, or you can give out heals to your pet for free after you throw out a Morturnum. It's incredibly useful. The other life tap item, this isn't a dot, this is a direct damage. This is Drain Soul, Sacred Shield of Dread. I have this quest line is going to be up on my Necromancer class series, my channel, so that's going to be there. The only thing I don't like about it is it's got a huge long cast. That's ridiculous. It takes normally 3 seconds for a life tap to go off. This takes 13. Just kind of bad. So I don't necessarily like the shield all that much. I mean, it's useful to have, but it's a bit much. Some other things. So these items I consider, the Demi-Lich Skullcap I think is a must-have. I think this is even more of a must-have. These 3 items I consider are must-have for Necromancers. Circlet of Shadow, and make sure it's not Circlet of Shadows with an S at the end. Circlet of Shadows. It's going to be Circlet of Shadow without an S. This is an instant cast invisibility, which is incredibly useful. So it's an instant charm break, and it's also an instant invisibility. So you never have to worry about going through zones where mobs don't see through invis. It's actually incredibly useful. And it allows you to actually stand up from feign death and invis like that. J-boots are needed because of the fungi staff. J-boots, you really have no run speed boost as a Necromancer, and oftentimes you'll want to use it as a junk buff in the first slot. So that if you get dispelled, it's, you know, it goes after the J-boots and not your standard buffs. J-boots, the nice thing about it too is that with this fungus staff, it dispels all the sows or the run speed buffs that are on you. So you move incredibly slow. I can show it. I'm crawling right now. Whereas if I turn it off, got decent speed. So with J-boots, It makes it so you can go a little bit faster, not significantly, but so you're not at a complete crawl. It helps out. And the fungus staff, what's nice about this is it can actually counteract a bit of the lich line. The fungus staff, this is pre-nerf, fungus covered great staff. It's a clickable buff that gives you a bit of extra HP regen, so that essentially your lich line barely consumes any health as a Ixar. You can actually lich for almost for free. It's almost like having a free clarity up. So this is actually a really must-have item, I think, for necromancers. It's a big helpful item. So yeah, I think as a necromancer, you absolutely want to get a Circlet of Shadow. You want to get a fungus staff, J-boots, and there's some other clickies. So this is the Encyclopedia Necrothurgia. This comes from Plane of Hate. This is actually a buff to how strong your pets are. I think up to a certain level, which is useful, and it's also an instant reclaim energy, which is quite useful in that regard too. So you don't have to do a quest line. Over there, Hammer of a Course. And that's most of the big stuff. You want to keep a Pearl for your own damage shield spell or for Koth, but beyond that, those are most of the big clickies when it comes to necromancers. Now, some other things I will mention. Necromancers have 2 invulnerability lines. Now, they both take 10 minutes to recharge, but it's Quivering Veil of Zarn and Harm Shield. So they actually have 2. This is nice because it gives you a heal. Yeah, it gives you a heal, so it sometimes low HP aggro can get you killed. Necromancers also, of course, have Feign Death, which is incredibly useful. Sometimes it's failed catastrophically, but having it is very useful. Necromancers also have Gate and Levant. Levant at level 55. This is actually an evac spell. So on Kidorian, I actually have him bound at the fire pots, which I'll show. He's bound at the fire pots. So I can get around most places in Norath really, really quick. The only danger is Fatedar. And any caster class can pretty much bind to the fire pots as long as you get there before the patch. I don't know if they've nerfed it yet, but I got in prior to the nerf. So these are the fire pots down here south in Timra Steep. And it lets you port to almost all the major cities. My favorite fire pot is actually to Neriak right here, because it's the quickest bank for me to get to. In some cases, my Necromancer can get around a lot faster than even my Bard can, just because the mere factor of this. Yeah. Let's go around, get to the bank. What's nice, I've noticed, is even though I'm a Ixar, I found my faction with the parcel merchant here in the bank. I'm actually ally faction, surprisingly, even though I'm kill on sight in Neriak. Ally faction with the parcel merchant, so I can parcel and I can sell here. And with the banker, I'm dubious, I can use him, which is incredibly useful. So yeah, I love the fire pots thing, and with Levant, you can evac out of most zones. It's only self; it's self only. But like, say if you're in Chardok, you can evac straight out to the exit. I think you can use it to break aggro in some cases. With evac, you can use it to get around some pretty big zones. It's pretty useful in that regard. Now let's talk about the next facet. So that was Gate and Levant. Let's talk about the Lich line. This is the last major thing. So Necromancers actually have arguably the best mana regeneration in the game with their Lich line. Ooh, that's a guard. That is right in here. Usually guards don't path in here, so it's kind of strange. Yeah, let's do the Lich line. Load it up. Versions Demi-Lich. So right now my mana regen is 1 standing. And 32 now. And if I sit, so that's a boost of 31. And if I sit down, it goes up to 56. That's a tremendous amount of mana regen coming in. It's the best in the game, from my understanding. The only problem is with Lich Line, you sap hit points. So that's why it's so useful to have the Fungi Staff, because it counteracts it. And as well as with the Demi-Lich Skull Cap, you can counteract it as well. So that's why those are particularly useful. But you have to be careful of the timers eventually wear out. So let me get to a safe spot and feign death. Because now I'm going to talk about the dots. We'll go to Ocean. I'm going to gate and I'll evac. I'll show Levon. So this will take me to the fire pots, and then the evac spot in Timber Steep is the chessboard aisle. Right there. And one trick is, as soon as you come in, click the Circle of Shadows so that you go invis ASAP. I've beaten aggro by that way, even when I zoned in right next to hostile mobs. Yep, here we go. Chessboard. Chessboard Island. I think he's killing sight to me, is he? Oh, he's killed someone. He just got off of killing someone. Okay, so let's do the next part of the video, the next and last part of this video, which is going to be dot efficiencies. I think this is the most important part to pay attention to as a Necro. So this is going to be talking about what dots should you use and why. And this is 33 minutes in. All right, so let's talk about the dots. So the way you calculate dot efficiencies, necromancers have a lot of different dots, or just mana efficiencies in general. The way you calculate it is you take the calculator out. So this dot lasts for 36 seconds and does a tick every 6 seconds. So 36 seconds divided by 6. So you get 6 ticks of this, times it by 351 damage per tick. So it does 2,106, and it has a direct damage component of 41. So it does 2,147 damage if it lasts for the full 36-second duration. And if you divide that by the mana that it costs without the specialization bonus, this dot is a 5.25 efficiency dot. So you're getting about, oh crap, that person's going to be in a death loop. Or not. Is it KOS to me? No. It's going to feign death, so I don't have to worry about getting aggro. So, that's how you calculate dot efficiencies. So let's talk about the various different dots that necromancers have. I'm going to rank them in order of efficiency. So I'm going to do 1, charm. Charm or Thrall of Bones. So I consider Charm to actually be the most mana efficient means of DPS that a Necromancer can do. So plus haste. So this costs 500 mana, but it lasts for I think like 16 minutes. 500 mana over 16 minutes is incredibly efficient. Now, I can't calculate how efficient this is because pets do various different amounts of damage, but over 16 minutes, it's incredibly easy to get that 500 mana back. And it's only 500 mana because I'm adding haste. The charm itself only costs 300 mana. Haste is 200. The amount of DPS that these charm pets just lay out is incredible. And I actually think that Charm is the best DPS a Necromancer can do because it's not time contingent. The problem with most of the dots is, again, like I mentioned, most groups are killing mobs within 15 to 30 seconds. And most Necromancer dots last significantly longer than that. So most dots are very inefficient as a Necromancer. But with Charm and with Haste, these pets are smacking so hard and you're using so little mana that your DPS is still top tier in the group with that Charm pet. And what's nice about it is you're almost always full mana doing this too. So you're quick on your feet. You can kind of throw out an extra nuke here and there if you want to. It's very efficient, and it's static DPS that even if if you can't even land your dots on it, a Charm pet can still DPS it, like many minis in Hate. That say you can't land your disease dots on them, you can still hit them with the Charm pet. So I think Charm pets are actually number one in terms of the efficiency of damage efficiency a Necromancer has. And even with Charm breaks and all that stuff, so long as you can heal yourself with, say, the Morturum cap, you take a couple hits, I still think it's worth charming, even considering. It just can get a little bit risky, but still worth doing. The second most efficient dot that Necromancers have is Splurt. I think this is bet for root rotting and raids. It's 237 mana over 1 minute and 36 seconds. And it does 2110 damage, totaling it out to be an 8.90 efficiency. So let me just put that down, yeah. 8.90 efficiency, but it lasts for 1 minute and 36 seconds. So Splurt is actually the most mana efficient dot that a Necromancer has. It doesn't do any direct damage, which is a nice thing about it, so you can use it on a root rot. It's great for raids for extended fights because it lands on most things. And the other thing that's really nice about it is that because it doesn't do all its damage up front, because it slowly ramps up, it doesn't do big hits immediately. It starts from 11 damage and works its way up eventually to 191 out towards the last ticks of this dot. It doesn't build up a tremendous amount of aggro like poison dots do, so you don't have to worry about aggro getting swapped onto you like if you use poison. The only problem with it is it lasts 1 minute 36 seconds. Most group kills are doing 15 to 30 seconds. This dot, if you don't use a dot to its full duration, it's incredibly inefficient. An almost 9-point efficiency dot goes down to maybe a 1-point efficiency dot if you kill within 15 seconds. So this dot is really best for root rotting and just raids of an extended fight. The third most efficient dot is Plague. So Splurt is magic based, Charm is magic based, Plague is disease based, and this is not a root rotting, it's more of a DPS output. It is a 7.05 efficiency dot that lasts for 1 minute 18 seconds. Let's see, Splurt does 210 Plague does 2172 damage. Plague is the next most efficient dot. The only issue with Plague is it has a direct damage component, so it will break a root. But it is the third most mana efficient way a Necromancer can deal damage at level 60. And with root rotting, you can pull with it actually, take a couple hits, and then root the mob and back off. And that's actually probably the best way to use it if you're going to root rot with it. But if you really don't have any room to move, then I wouldn't use Plague. But yeah, and again, another issue with it is it does last pretty long, 1 minute 18 seconds. So it's not terribly great for short fights. The fourth most efficient dot that Necromancers have is Envenom Bolt, which is poison. Kind of struggles to land sometime. And it is a primary DPS dot too. I look at it's the fastest DPS dot that Necromancers have. So it costs 409 mana. And it lasts for 36 seconds. Get this out. So it's a 5.25 efficiency over 36 seconds. And it does 2147 damage. Level 60. So this dot is the fourth most efficient dot. It has a direct damage hit to it, so again, it's not a very good one to use for root rotting. It will break a root, 5.25 efficiency, so still very good. The nice thing about this dot is it is the fastest damage output that a Necromancer can do with the dot at level 60. There's no dot that expires faster. So this dot does something like 300 damage, somewhere around the 300 damage range per tick. So it really spits out damage quick. And if your group is killing a little bit slower than average, yeah, 36 seconds, this dot is incredible. There is one major issue with it, though. Absolutely one major issue. It costs a lot of mana. You usually can't regenerate it fast enough because you can't sit at all if you use this dot. This dot generates so much aggro because it hits so hard that tanks will oftentimes have a really hard time in pulling aggro off of you. That's the biggest issue with Envenom Bolt and the poison line dots. They hit too hard and they draw too much aggro, so that tanks will struggle to hold the aggro off you. And even if they can hold the aggro off of you, you have to stand, because if you sit, the mob's going to come after you. So that's part of the problem with it. But you can root to deal with that issue, but considering that a lot of people in groups have procs and stuff, that would just break the roots, so it's kind of pointless. So Envenom Bolt, it's the fastest DPS dot, but it has some issues here and there. The next most efficient dot is Cessation of Core. So this will be the fifth most efficient dot. This is a disease dot that is great for root rotting. And it is a 5.19 efficiency. It lasts for 54 seconds. And it does 1053 damage. Cessation of Core doesn't do any direct damage, so it can be used for root rotting without breaking a root. It's okay time-wise. Its efficiency is pretty decent. The only thing I don't like about Cessation of Core is this is where your dots start to significantly drop off in damage. So it's 1,000 damage less over the same pretty much time period as Envenom Bolt. So you have to have a lot more patience if you're going to use this dot. That's the major issue I have with it. But, I mean, it works. It absolutely works. The next dot, the next most efficient dot is Pyro Crewer, which is fire. Pyro Crewer, which is a fire line dot. It's good for root rotting, and it's also especially good for highly resistant mobs. Fire dots can land on fire dots land on most mobs that are resistant to everything else that's here. It'll land on most magic resist mobs or even poison or disease mobs. It is a 4.50 efficiency. It lasts for 48 seconds. And it does 1,328 damage. So again, yeah, Pyro Cure, Fire Dot, it lands on most mobs. And it's great for root rotting because it doesn't have a direct damage component. Really great for raids. This is a really good dot for raids. But it's otherwise it's not as efficient. If there's nothing that'll land on a mob, you know, definitely throw a Pyro Cure on it, but it's not as efficient. And it doesn't do as much damage as these top ones. The next most efficient dot is actually, or the next most efficient means of doing damage is Exile Undead, which is a direct damage undead nuke. That is a 4.50 efficiency. That's instant, and it does 946 damage. And often you get a Bane Strike that goes along with it. So this is why it's great to play a Necromancer, because you can, if you go to undead zones, because you can charm undead mobs and have a huge amount of mana, and you can have a huge amount of DPS output. And as well, you can do direct damage nukes, which if your group is killing too fast, I actually love this spell. If your group is killing within that 15 to 30 seconds time span, to where almost all your dots are inefficient, this is actually worth casting. This efficiency is actually quite worth casting. Just throwing one nuke out, it's not that bad. It's really killing undead mobs and charming undead mobs is really a Necromancer's playground. So going to undead zones is absolutely incredible. And it's Necromancers are great DPS against undead mobs. They're just not so much against living mobs. And if they can't charm, their DPS is not as significant in a group. So definitely as a Necromancer, make sure you go into undead zones, primarily for EXP. The next most efficient is Devouring Darkness, which is a snare. It is a 4.0 efficiency that lasts for 1 minute and 18 seconds and does 1599 damage. Here's what I don't like about this thing. It does a decent amount of damage, of course, but it lasts a bit too long, and for what its purpose is, it costs 400 mana to cast this snare, whereas the epic is free. The epic is free, and it only takes 9 seconds to cast that for a free, instead of having to spend 400 mana, which takes a long time to regenerate back. It doesn't do as much damage, though. I don't think the epic does as much damage, but Devouring Darkness is not that bad. It's basically your highest damage snare. I just don't like it that much because I think a snare really needs to be, you want to use it. It's not intended to be mana efficient. It's just intended to do its function. That's why I often use that level 11 snare, Engulfing Darkness or Clinging Darkness. It's good enough to snare a mob, doesn't cost too much mana to the point where it's a huge strain, and it doesn't matter if it's being efficient. Costing a 400 mana snare that lasts for 1 minute 18 when most mobs are going down quite quick is highly inefficient, not even worth it. And even when you're root rotting, I mean, there's better dots to use. I really wouldn't. This is more of a niche circumstance. I don't really see the use of this. Unless maybe you say you're fear kiting, but yeah, I really don't see the use of this spell. The next most efficient is the Incinerate Bones line, which is a direct damage. Fire, so these will typically land. Fire or cold. And this is 2.38 efficiency for 500 damage. The only problem I don't like about this is it takes forever to cast. And again, it's almost never worth using. I mean, you can use this against living mobs if you can't use Exile Undead. But the problem with it is, again, it takes forever to cast that. Oftentimes, by the time it's about to go off, the mob's already dead. So I don't particularly like it that much. But it's there, you know, if you want to use it. The next most efficient is Vexing Mordinia, which is a magic life tap dot. So this will actually land on most things. I think you can use it for root rotting. I don't really use it. I use the Demi-Lich Skullcap version of it, but it's a 2.22 efficiency that does 1098 damage. So that's how much it's healing you for. That's actually not that bad. And it lasts for 54 seconds. This dot, it's useful if you've a highly resistant mob that magic will land on. Like if Spurt will land, this will probably land. And likely fire. I'd probably use those three. But it's highly mana inefficient. But the one thing I will say about it, it is actually the most mana efficient life tap that a Necromancer does have outside of Clickies. Because I'll show the last one that I will really mention is the life tap, Touch of Night life tap. As you get higher in level, the life taps become more efficient, but they also become more mana costly. So this is a magic. It'll land on most things. It's a life tap. And it is a 1.85 efficiency for 708 damage life tap. It's a direct damage. So if you need to heal immediately, yeah, I'd use this. But it costs nearly 400 mana and it's very mana inefficient. If you don't need to heal immediately, Vexing Mordinia is actually a better way of regenerating health back. But I'd say clicky wise, Morturnum for the 120. There is no efficiency with it because it's just the time. The 10-second cast that lasts for a minute 54. It does pretty much the same amount of damage as Vexing Mordinia. So say about 1k in hit points that you're regenerating back. Morturnum is actually a really nice dot to have in that regard, and it's mana free. So this is actually my preferred method to heal. I don't really life tap at all, unless it's very dire. I never really use Vexing Mordinia because Morturnum is the same pretty much thing. They override each other. And considering the efficiency of this dot of being 2.22, one of the worst, having a mana free one is way better. Absolutely way better. So those are the dots. What would I recommend to do? So for top DPS, yes, the most DPS you could put out, I would Charm. I'd use for top DPS long term. Yeah, I'd do Charm. I'd throw Splurt. I'd throw Plague. Throw Envenom Bolt. Morturnum. Epic Snare. And maybe a Fire Pyrocure for long-term fight. Top DPS for a short-term fight. Charm. Envenom Bolt if it's fast enough. And direct damage nukes. Like Exile Undead. Top DPS for a resistant fight. Charm. And then usually with these resistant fights, Splurt will usually land. Pyro Crewer will usually land. Morturnum will usually land. Or Vexing Mordinia. And that's kind of it. You can use like the Incinerate Bones, the direct damages. But typically that's all that'll land. If it even will land. On a resistant mob. And then if you're talking about root rotting and you don't want to break roots, then you'll definitely want to use Splurt or Turnum, Cessation of Core. Those are the dots I would use for that particular circumstance. I don't really snare kite, so I don't know what dots you necessarily use, but I mean, I would probably just stick with these ones. But yeah, these are the dots I'd use. These are the mana efficiencies. So didn't mean to make it go forever, but this is really a big key part of almost any class is really understanding how they play. Same thing with the Bard class. It's knowing all the abilities. As a Necromancer class, you need to know the efficiency of all your spells, and you also need to know how fast they put out damage so that you can really be peak. You can really do the best job that you possibly can. So these are the spells. Thank you guys so much for watching the video, and I hope enjoy the content that comes out in the future. Thank you guys so much for watching. This channel will be nothing without your support.